The screams echoed when he stopped before that scene of violence. Without hesitation on his horse, he took the young woman by the hand and carried her with him, tearing her from the invisible chains of her own family. What happened next changed her destiny forever. Perhaps you have already witnessed or lived through moments like this, where one person's courage can change everything. If this story awakens memories or reflections in you, know that you are not alone in this journey. Before we dive into this moving story, leave a comment below saying where you're watching from. Your presence means so much to us. Enjoy this journey of faith and hope. In the interior of Ceará, between arid plateaus and gravel roads that disappeared into the horizon, there was a district called Pedra Branca. The adobe houses, the whitish dust that permeated everything, the church bell that tolled even when there was no deceased. Everything here breathed a silence that concealed more than it revealed. It was the kind of place where stories were stifled before they became scandals, where others' pain dissolved like a mirage at midday. It was in this setting that Conceição's story unfolded. Daughter of a large, rigid and bitter family, she lived as if she occupied a space that no one wanted to yield. Her mother, Dona Severina, looked at her coldly. Her brothers Raimundo and João treated her like a burden. Her father, Senor Manuel, always loud-voiced and heavy-handed, needed no reason to beat her. A pot out of place, a crooked answer, a look that seemed disrespectful was enough. Over the years, Conceição unlearned how to raise her eyes. Her frail body and patched clothes hid recent and old marks. But none was more painful than loneliness. Each of us carries invisible scars. If Conceição's story echoes in your heart, leave in the comments which moment of your own journey of overcoming marks you most. The people in the district knew. Some noticed the bruises, others had already heard the muffled screams coming from the back of the house in the afternoons, but no one got involved. His family was known for its tradition, and messing with them meant certain trouble. The justification was always the same. Family is an internal matter. And so time passed, and Conceição was kept like a shadow inside her own house, doing the heaviest work, sleeping on a loft in the back shed, eating the leftovers from others' dinner. She had no friends, didn't go to school, didn't participate in the district's celebrations. It was as if she didn't exist, and perhaps that was exactly what the family wanted, for her to disappear, preferably without fanfare, without public shame, without anyone missing her. But it was precisely the absence of noise in her existence that caught someone's attention. The meeting with destiny. Sebastião Mendes was a man who had already learned the weight of absence. A widower for 9 years, he lived alone on a distant farm, caring for goats, land and memories. He never had children, nor had he rebuilt his love life. Not for lack of opportunity, but due to emotional inability to open space again. The departure of Isabel, his wife, had been like a stone thrown at his chest, silent but devastating. Since then, he dedicated himself only to work and contact with a few cowboys who respected his silence. Sebastião had never been given to sentimentalism, but he wasn't blind. He had encountered Conceição at a fair almost 2 years ago and noticed her downcast eyes, hidden arms, gestures too timid for a 19-year-old woman. Over the months, he saw her other times, carrying heavy water cans, being pushed roughly, collecting clothes under the scorching sun without complaining. Something about that girl caused him unease, as if he recognized in her an old pain, disguised but present. Sometimes we are called to be the change we would have liked to see in our own lives. Share in the comments if you have ever been or had a Sebastião in your story. That Saturday morning, when by chance he passed in front of Conceição's family house, he saw a scene that froze his body for moments. The girl was on her knees in the yard, her dress torn, her face turned to the ground, while someone, perhaps her brother, perhaps her father himself, screamed offenses and kicked a bowl near her. There was no hesitation. Sebastião dismounted his horse, went to the entrance and asked to speak with the patriarch. Doña Socorro, the family's neighbor known for her curiosity, watched everything through the window crack. She saw when Señor Manuel received Sebastião with distrust, saw when the two men entered the house, and heard, even unwillingly, the deep tones of a discussion that, although it didn't reach screams, carried an almost palpable tension. "You have no right to meddle in family affairs," said Señor Manuel, while serving a shot of cachaça to the unexpected visitor, more out of hospitality obligation than courtesy. "I didn't come to meddle in your affairs. I came to do business," replied Sebastião without touching the glass. "I need someone to help in the house, someone who knows how to handle domestic work. I thought maybe your daughter could be that person." Señor Manuel laughed, a dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "And why exactly my daughter? There are so many girls in the district. Because she seems capable to me," Sebastião cut him off, "and because I'm willing to pay well, very well." The father's eyes gleamed, not from love for his daughter, but at the mention of money. He had been in debt for months with Señor Chico's store, and the bank threatened to take the piece of land he still had left. Having one less mouth to feed and still getting paid for it was tempting, but there was pride and there was distrust. "What exactly do you want from her?" Sebastião kept his gaze steady. "Respect, work, and nothing more than that. She'll have her own room, food on the table, and fair wages. If she doesn't adapt or doesn't serve, she can return, but I think it will be good for everyone." Señor Manuel pondered. The girl was good for nothing anyway, only caused trouble. She was too weak for field work, too stubborn to obey without questioning. And there was that way about her, that look that seemed to judge even when lowered. It would be a relief to get rid of that. "How much?" he asked without beating around the bush. Sebastião took an envelope from his pocket. "Half now, half in 3 months, if she continues there." The patriarch looked at the contents and nodded, not hiding his satisfaction. He called his daughter, who entered with her head down, still bearing marks of humiliation from the yard. "Pack your things. You're going to work at Señor Sebastião's farm." Conceição raised her eyes, confused. She didn't know that man, except for having seen him in the district a few times. She didn't understand what was happening, but her father's tone didn't admit questioning. With trembling hands, she gathered the little she had. Some clothes, a broken horn comb, a hair ribbon that had belonged to her grandmother. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. No one said goodbye to her. Only her mother, seeing her leave through the front door, murmured something that could be, "Behave yourself," or "Don't come back." It was hard to distinguish through the empty expression. And the journey to a new life. When Conceição left the house with a small bundle in her hands and her face dirty with tears, no one in the neighborhood had the courage to ask. But the news spread fast. Señor Sebastião, from Santa Cruz Farm, took Manuel's daughter. They say he paid for her. The rumors started this way, in whispers, in exchanged glances at store doors, in conversations after Sunday prayer. Some said it was an obscure arrangement, others that the solitary farmer had finally decided to find a wife, even if it was that graceless and mistreated girl. Few, very few, considered the possibility of a good deed. After all, in Pedra Branca, kindness was as rare as rain in the sertão. Like Conceição, we have all walked toward the unknown, carrying only hope. If you're living your own moment of transition, tell our community. Your story can inspire others. At Santa Cruz Farm, silence was the first resident to receive her. Sebastião didn't impose words, nor did he demand gratitude. He just pointed to a clean room, left a change of clothes, and offered a warm meal. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll talk about work," he said before withdrawing. Conceição, however, didn't know what to do with that. Throughout her life, she had learned to distrust any kindness. She knew that sooner or later the charge would come. She was just waiting to discover what the price would be this time. She sat on the edge of the bed, a real bed, with a soft mattress and clean sheets, and felt dizzy, not from weakness, although she had barely eaten that day, but from strangeness. Suddenly, she was in an unknown place, away from the family that mistreated her, but also away from everything she knew, and that was as frightening as it was liberating. She didn't sleep that first night. She lay with open eyes, watching the shadows on the ceiling, expecting that at any moment someone would burst through the door with screams and demands. But nothing happened. The silence of the farm was different from the oppressive silence of her parents' house. It was a living silence, filled with the night sounds of nature, the croaking of frogs in the pond, the distant song of an owl, the gentle wind in the leaves of the huasero trees. It was a silence that didn't threaten, and perhaps for that very reason, was so disturbing. The first steps. The next morning, even before sunrise, Conceição was already awake. She made the bed with care, folded the clothes she had barely touched, and sat waiting in a chair by the window. When Sebastião knocked gently on the door and entered, he found her tense, like an animal about to flee. "Good morning," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Did you sleep well?" Conceição nodded, even though it was a lie. She didn't know how to behave before this man. He didn't seem angry. He didn't have the smell of cachaça that her father usually had in the morning. He didn't look at her with that mixture of contempt and possession she knew so well. "Have you had breakfast?" asked Sebastião. She shook her head. "Then come. Doña Firmina has already prepared something in the kitchen." Conceição followed him through the corridors of the big house, an old but well-maintained construction, with wide windows and brick floors that creaked softly under her feet. The farm wasn't luxurious, but it had a solidity that spoke of generations. Old paintings on the walls, some dark furniture that seemed to tell stories in their carvings. Doña Firmina was a dark-skinned 60-year-old woman with graying hair tied in a bun and hands that betrayed decades of work. She received Conceição with a gentle smile, without questions, without judgments. She simply pointed to the table and served steaming coffee, hot tapioca, fresh cheese, fruits. "Eat, child, you need strength." How many times has someone's unexpected kindness changed your day? Here we create a space where every story of goodness counts. Leave yours in the comments. Breakfast passed in silence. Sebastião read an old almanac while eating. Doña Firmina went back and forth from the kitchen, busy with her tasks, and Conceição barely touched the food, embarrassed by such abundance. When she finally dared to taste the tapioca with cheese, the explosion of flavors almost made her cry. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten something so good, so fresh, so made with care. "After breakfast, I'll show you the farm," said Sebastião, breaking the silence. "I want you to know where you'll live and work." Work. Of course, that's what she was here for. She felt a tightness in her chest. What kind of work would it be? The same as she did at home, or something worse? Was she simply trading one type of servitude for another? But she said nothing, nodded, and waited for orders. Discovering a new world, the farm proved to be much larger than she had imagined. There was the corral, where dairy cows mooed gently, the orchard with various fruit trees, the carefully organized vegetable garden, the pond where fish occasionally jumped, and fields that stretched to the horizon, delimited by stone fences. There was also a small shed where tools were stored, a space for horses, and even a covered area where workers had their meals. "6 families live here besides me and Doña Firmina," explained Sebastião as they walked. "Each has their own house in that part there." He pointed to a set of simple but well-maintained houses, a few meters from the main house. "Everyone works on the farm, but they have their own crops too. We share what we produce." Conceição listened in silence, trying to absorb everything. It was a world completely different from what she knew. A world where people seemed to cooperate instead of compete, where work had a purpose beyond mere survival. "And what will I do here?" she finally managed to ask, her voice almost a whisper. Sebastião stopped walking and looked at her directly. It was the first time he had established real eye contact since she had arrived. "What do you know how to do, Conceição?" She lowered her eyes by instinct. "A little of everything. Wash, iron, cook, clean, care for animals." "And what do you like to do?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her about tastes or preferences. She'd never had the luxury of choosing, wanting, desiring. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Sebastião nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. "Well, for now you'll help Doña Firmina in the big house. She's getting old and needs someone to share the work with." But you won't be her servant, understand? You'll be her apprentice. I want you to learn to manage a house, not just serve it." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "And I want you to learn to read and write properly. Everyone on this farm knows how to read. It's the first rule of Santa Cruz. Knowledge is as important as work." The awakening of a new soul. Back at the big house, Doña Firmina showed Conceição her true quarters, a simple but cozy suite which was on the other side of the corridor near the kitchen. "This is where I sleep, and now you'll have your own room, not that storage room I showed you yesterday." "Sebastião just wanted to see how you would react." Conceição was confused. "I don't understand." The elderly lady smiled kindly. "He wanted to know if you would complain, demand something better. Many people would come here with expectations of luxury, comfort. You accepted what you were given without questioning. That says a lot about your character." It was strange to think she had been tested without knowing, but Conceição didn't feel anger. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was in a place where she would be treated fairly. Just as Conceição discovered her own worth, each of us has a unique journey of self-discovery. This community celebrates these transformations. Subscribe to follow more stories that honor the strength of the human spirit. In the days that followed, she slowly adapted to the farm's routine. She woke early, had breakfast with Doña Firmina and Sebastião when he hadn't already left for the field before dawn. Then she helped with household chores. She learned to make couscous, to separate clothes by types before washing, to iron carefully so as not to burn fabrics, to organize the pantry so nothing would spoil. At first, her hands trembled constantly and she broke some plates. She spilled milk and burned the beans. She expected screams, punishments, but they never came. Doña Firmina just sighed, showed how to do it correctly and said, "Next time it will work out." And surprisingly it did. In the afternoon, after the main tasks were completed, Doña Firmina sat with her on the back porch and taught her letters. Conceição knew the alphabet, could write her name and read simple words, but had never had formal education. Doña Firmina's mother had been a teacher, and she had inherited not only the knowledge, but the gift of teaching. "Life goes in circles, child," said the elderly lady, while guiding Conceição's finger over the letters in an old storybook. "Who would have thought that I, daughter of a rural worker, would be here teaching a girl like you to read? God writes straight with crooked lines." Conceição wanted to ask about Doña Firmina's story, about how she had arrived at Santa Cruz farm, about her relationship with Sebastião, but she still didn't feel comfortable asking personal questions. For now, she absorbed what she could, grateful for the kindness with which she was treated, always expecting it to end, for the dream to dissipate and return to the cruel reality she knew. Sebastião, meanwhile, kept distant but present. He appeared at meals, asked about her progress, listened attentively when Doña Firmina reported advances in lessons. Sometimes he brought a new book or magazine or newspaper from the city and left it on the table with, "I thought this might interest you." He never demanded anything in return, never invaded her space, never made her feel threatened. It was as if he was just planting seeds without hurry to see the harvest. The first crisis. One night, after almost 2 months on the farm, Conceição woke up screaming. The nightmare was recurring. She was back at her parents' house being dragged by the hair by her older brother, while her father prepared the belt to beat her. She was sweating cold, her heart racing. When the door opened and Doña Firmina entered, followed by Sebastião, she tried to compose herself, embarrassed for having caused such a commotion. "It's all right, child," said the elderly lady, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding her hands. "It was just a bad dream. Sorry, I didn't want to disturb." Sebastião remained at the door, respecting the feminine space, but his presence was somehow comforting. "It's not a disturbance," he said in a low and calm voice. "We all have our ghosts. Over time, they lose their strength. We all face our internal ghosts. If you're going through a healing process, know that sharing your journey can help others. Tell in the comments how you found strength to move forward." That dawn, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of lemon balm tea that Doña Firmina had prepared, Conceição felt something break inside her. It wasn't a violent break, but gentle, like the thaw of a river in spring, and the words began to flow. She told about life in her parents' house, about the abuse, about constant fear, about the feeling of not belonging anywhere. She spoke until her voice became hoarse, until the tears dried, until the sky began to lighten on the horizon. Doña Firmina listened in silence, occasionally wiping away a furtive tear. Sebastião remained motionless, his face a mask of control, but his eyes betrayed contained emotion. When she finally stopped talking, exhausted, Conceição felt a relief she had never experienced before. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. No one offered cheap advice. No one tried to minimize her pain with canned phrases. They simply accepted her story, her truth, without judgments. "Thank you for trusting us," said Sebastião, finally breaking the silence. "Your trust is a gift we won't waste." It was the first time Conceição had truly smiled since arriving at the farm, a small but genuine smile. And in that moment she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could start building something new there. Something that wasn't based on fear or submission, but on mutual trust and respect. The months passed like clouds in the Shiraz sky, slowly but in constant movement. Conceição didn't notice immediately, but her body began to change. The previously sunken cheeks gained color. The thin arms acquired strength. The brown hair, always mistreated and lifeless, now shone under the morning sun when she combed it on the porch. Doña Firmina was the first to notice. "You're becoming a real woman, child. Before it was just fright and bones, now you have flesh and smile." Conceição blushed at the comment, but felt a warmth in her chest. It was true. She was slowly learning to exist, not just survive. Reading had progressed significantly. She could already read small texts alone, and every night, before sleeping, she devoured a chapter of the book Sebastião had lent her, a story about an orphan who found her way in the world. Sometimes she identified so much with the character that she cried silently, tears staining the yellowed pages. Writing was still difficult. Her letters came out crooked, clumsy, but there was fierce determination in every word she formed. It was as if each complete sentence was a small victory against the past that tried to erase her. Like Conceição, who learned that her story deserved to be told, you too have a voice that deserves to be heard. If this journey of overcoming touches your heart, share in the comments what lesson you will take to life. One Sunday afternoon, when the farm rested from heavy work and the employees visited relatives in the district or simply enjoyed the day with family, Conceição found Sebastião sitting under a large umbu tree, reading. She hesitated for a moment, but gathered courage and approached. "Can I sit?" He raised his eyes from the book, surprised by her initiative. In recent months, Conceição rarely sought his company directly. "Of course," he replied, indicating the space beside him on the large root that served as a natural bench. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the song of the sabias and the distant lowing of cattle. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For everything. For taking me out of that house. For giving me a place. For—" She hesitated, looking for the right word. "For seeing me." Sebastião closed the book and set it aside. There was something in his face, a mixture of contained emotion and an old sadness that made Conceição think of the story Doña Firmina had told her in secret. How Isabel, Sebastião's wife, had departed during a high fever along with the child she was carrying. How that double loss had transformed the farmer, previously expansive and full of plans, into a reserved and distant man. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I did what any decent person would do." "No," Conceição retorted with a firmness that surprised them both. "Decent people passed by me all my life and turned their faces. You were the only one who stopped, who did something." He stared at her for a long moment. "You didn't even know me." "I knew enough," replied Sebastião. "I saw a person in suffering, someone who deserved a chance." Conceição lowered her eyes, feeling the familiar burning of tears she tried to contain. And if I don't deserve it? And if I'm not good enough for all this? It was a fear that had accompanied her since arriving at the farm, the fear that sooner or later they would realize she wasn't worth the effort, that she was too damaged, too broken, too useless. As her father always said, Sebastião sighed deeply. Conceição, look at me. She raised her eyes, hesitating. We all carry scars. We all make mistakes. We all have parts we would like to hide or change. That doesn't make us less deserving of respect or kindness. He paused, choosing words carefully. What you lived through was unfair and cruel, but it doesn't define who you are or who you can become. In that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't a dramatic change. There was no epiphany or revelation, just a subtle shift, like when twilight light slowly transforms the landscape. An invisible barrier had fallen. And for the first time, Conceição saw Sebastião not as her savior or boss, but as a man with his own pains and fears, his own journey of survival. The awakening of feelings. From that day forward, a new dynamic began to form. Conceição began to seek Sebastião's company more, sometimes just to sit together in silence on the porch, other times to discuss the book she was reading, or for him to explain how the farm's administration worked. On other occasions, simply to walk through the orchard, observing the ripening fruits and talking about banal things of daily life. Doña Fermina observed that approach with a mixture of approval and caution. One night, while teaching Conceição to make papaya candy in the large copper pot, the lady commented, "I've seen you and the boss together." Conceição stirred the candy with more vigor, trying to disguise the blush that rose to her face. "He has been teaching me many things." "I know he has," replied Doña Fermina, with a tone that suggested she understood more than had been said. "Just remember, a widower's heart is like burned land. It seems dead, but just a little rain is enough for life to return with everything." The young woman stopped stirring the candy, confused. "What do you mean?" The elderly lady gave an enigmatic smile. "I mean that the boss spent a long time closed in on himself. Now he's blooming again. It's beautiful to see, but every flowering needs care." Conceição felt her heart accelerate. She hadn't thought of Sebastião that way. Or she had. The nights when she dreamed of him, no longer nightmares, but confused images of closeness and warmth. The moments when she caught herself observing his hands while he explained something, imagining what it would be like to be touched by them. The way her chest seemed lighter when he smiled. A rare and precious event, like rain in the sertão. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, returning to stirring the candy. "You do," replied Doña Fermina, but didn't insist on the subject. The Festa de São Pedro. The Festa de São Pedro had always been the most anticipated event on Pedra Branca's calendar. For a few nights, the small district transformed. Colored lights decorated the central square, stalls of typical foods and games spread through the dirt streets, and music swayed couples dancing quadrilla until dawn. It was the moment when old grudges were temporarily forgotten, new loves were born under the pretext of sympathies, and the community gathered to celebrate. That year, the festa coincided with the second anniversary of Conceição's arrival at Santa Cruz Farm. 24 months that had transformed not only her appearance, but her essence. The frightened and submissive young woman had given way to a woman who was beginning to know herself, to value herself, to dream of possibilities that had previously seemed impossible. The relationship with Sebastião had stabilized in a curious middle ground. They were no longer just boss and employee, nor exactly friends, much less what their hearts secretly desired. They existed in an undefined space of respectful closeness, where every gesture, every word, every silence carried unspoken meanings. "We're all going," announced Sebastião during dinner, 2 nights before the festa. Santa Cruz Farm always participates in São Pedro's celebrations. It's tradition. There was something of a challenge in his voice, as if he were ready to face any adversity that might arise. Conceição felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She would go yes, with her head held high. Like Conceição, who found courage to face her past, we all have moments when we need to show ourselves to the world with our truth. What courage does this story awaken in you? Share in the comments. On the morning of the festa, the farm buzzed with activity. The employees prepared the foods they would take to share. The women ironed special clothes kept for festive occasions. The children ran excitedly, rehearsing quadrille steps. Doña Firmina had prepared a surprise for Conceição. A new dress of flowered chintz, blue with small yellow flowers, full-skirted as tradition demanded. "I made it thinking of you," said the elderly lady with a tender smile. "A beautiful girl like you deserves to present herself as she should." Conceição felt tears in her eyes when trying on the dress. She had never had something made especially for her with such care and love. It seemed like a dream, that colorful clothing, that new life, that feeling of belonging. When it was time to leave, everyone gathered in the farm's courtyard. They would go by truck, as was customary. The men in the truck bed, the women and children in the cabin and on improvised benches. Sebastião, however, surprised everyone by announcing, "Conceição will come with me in the car." She looked at him, surprised. The old jeep, which he used for longer trips, rarely left the garage. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly, when the others were already heading toward the truck. "Absolutely," he replied with calm determination. "We're going to enter the festa together. I want everyone to see that we have nothing to hide." Conceição's heart accelerated at those words. There was an implicit declaration there, a public position that wouldn't go unnoticed. Sebastião was willing to face gossip and judgments head-on at her side. It was a gesture of respect, protection, and perhaps she dared to think something deeper. Confrontation with the past. Their arrival at the district was exactly as they expected, full of stares, whispers, and almost palpable tension. When Sebastião parked the jeep in the square, already packed with people, a brief silence fell over the nearest people. You could clearly see the moment when they recognized Conceição, more beautiful, stronger, unrecognizable in her new confidence. And then, inevitably, the looks that went from her to Sebastião, full of speculation and judgment. But the farmer didn't seem to notice or chose to ignore. With studied naturalness, he got out of the car, walked around and opened the door for Conceição, offering her his arm as he would with any respectable lady. She hesitated for a second, then accepted the gesture, and together they walked to the center of the festa. The first hours passed in controlled tension. Conceição remained close to Doña Firmina and the other women from the farm, while Sebastião talked with other farmers and merchants. From afar, they exchanged occasional glances as if to confirm that everything was all right. The food was good, the music lively, and gradually Conceição began to relax. That's when she saw her parents. They were on the other side of the square, but it was impossible not to notice them. Señor Manuel, with the same authoritarian posture as always, just a little more hunched, as if time and alcohol were corroding him from within. Doña Severina, thin and faded like a shadow, following her husband, as she had always done. For a moment, Conceição's gaze crossed with her mother's. There was no tenderness there, nor longing, just an emptiness that hurt more than any explicit rejection. She averted her gaze, feeling a knot in her throat. A few minutes later, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was João, her middle brother. "Conceição," he said with a hesitant smile. "It's good to see you." She was tense for a moment, then relaxed upon noticing the sincerity in his eyes. João had always been the gentlest in the family, the one who suffered in silence, who sometimes tried to protect her within his means. "João, how are you?" "Getting by," he replied with a resigned shrug. "Working on Señor Damião's farm. It's not much, but it's honest." They talked for a few minutes, cautious words full of gaps and unspoken things. João told about the district, about mutual acquaintances, avoiding mentioning their parents or Raimundo. Conceição spoke about the farm, about the new skills she had learned, about how well she was doing. It was a superficial conversation, but loaded with contained emotion. "You look happy," Joan said finally with a sad smile. I am, replied Conceição honestly. I found a place where I can be myself. He nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. I'm glad, really. Then lower. Be careful with Raimundo. He's been saying things. He's not well. Before he could elaborate, they were interrupted by a drawn-out and hostile voice. Look who's back, the princess of the farm. Raimundo was approaching unsteadily, his bloodshot eyes betraying that he had already drunk beyond measure. Conceição felt her body stiffen, an automatic reaction from years of abuse, but this time she didn't lower her head. Good evening, Raimundo, he laughed, an unpleasant sound. Good evening? Is that how you talk to family now, all educated, all important? Joan tried to intervene. Raimundo, let's go. It's not the time or place. Shut up, the older brother cut him off. I want to know what life as a farmer's mistress is like. Must be good, right? Soft bed, food on the table, expensive gifts. Conceição felt her blood freeze. People around began to stop to observe the scene, attracted by the aggressive tone. Don't talk about what you don't know, she said, keeping her voice firm, despite the internal trembling. You know nothing about my life. I know you turned your back on family, that you sold yourself for a roof and some nice clothes, that you sleep with an old man for interest. With each word he came closer, invading her personal space, the breath of cachaça making her instinctively retreat. Senor Sebastião gave me honest work and a safe place, Conceição retorted, her voice louder than intended. Something my own family never did. That was the last straw. With a sudden movement, Raimundo grabbed her arm forcefully, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. You ungrateful! After everything we did for you! She tried to break free, but the grip was too strong. For a moment, it was as if time had gone back, as if she was still that helpless girl, at the mercy of family violence. Then a voice cut through the air like a whip. Let her go, now. Sebastião was there, his eyes sparkling with contained fury, his posture tense like someone ready to intervene physically if necessary. Beside him, 2 farm employees, equally serious. Raimundo hesitated but didn't release Conceição. Ah, this isn't your business, old man. It's a family problem. Oh, Conceição works for me. Lives under my roof. That makes her my responsibility, said Sebastião, his voice low but loaded with authority. Now let her go before I forget we're at a festa. The crowd around them grew, attracted by the confrontation's tension. Suddenly, Senor Manuel pushed through the people, followed by some men from the district. What's happening here? He asked, his voice drawn out, indicating he had also been drinking. Raimundo immediately changed his tone, becoming almost tearful. Dad, I just want to bring our Conceição back. She doesn't belong in that place, with that man. Senor Manuel looked from Sebastião to Conceição, then back to the farmer. There was a cold calculation in his eyes. You paid to take my daughter. I thought it was for work, but apparently... He let the insinuation hang in the air, feeding the audience's murmurs. Conceição felt her legs weaken. It was her worst nightmare materialized, exposed, publicly humiliated, reduced again to an object, a possession to be disputed between men. But then something unexpected happened. The revelation of truth. Sebastião stepped forward, his voice strong enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I paid. I paid so she could have a chance away from the abuse she suffered. I paid because it was the only way to get her out of that hell you called home. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sebastián continued. Conceição works on my farm, has her own room, receives fair wages and is treated with the respect she deserves, something she never had with you. Senor Manuel advanced, his face contorted with rage. What exactly are you calling my family? Abusers, replied Sebastián without hesitation. Everyone in this district knew what happened in that house. The screams, the bruises, the fear in her eyes. And no one did anything, including me, for too long. How many times have we witnessed injustices and chosen silence? Sebastião's courage reminds us that sometimes we need to be the voice for those who cannot speak. If this scene awakens reflections in you, share in the comments. A heavy silence fell over the square. It was true. and everyone knew it. The open secret that no one had the courage to confront. Then a female voice cut through the silence. "It's true." Everyone turned. It was Doña Socorro, the gossipy neighbor, a lady respected in the community despite her sharp tongue. "I saw with my own eyes, more times than I'd like to remember, the girl being beaten, treated worse than an animal, and I kept quiet. May God forgive me." Other voices began to rise. "I saw, too. Once at the store. Those screams at night." The climate changed perceptibly. Suddenly it wasn't Sebastião who was under judgment, but Conceição's family. Senor Manuel noticed the change, his face paling under the tan from working in the sun. Raimundo, less perceptive, still tried, "Everyone's against us because of this." But he was interrupted by Juan, who finally found courage to take a stand. "Enough, Raimundo! Enough, Dad! We know what we did, what we allowed to happen." Senor Manuel shot his middle son a look of pure hatred, then turned to Sebastião. "This isn't over." And dragging Raimundo by the arm, he walked away, rudely pushing through the crowd. Doña Severina hesitated for a moment, looking at her daughter with an indescribable expression before following her husband, as she had always done. Conceição was trembling, not from fear, but from a complex emotion she couldn't name. Relief, perhaps, or vindication, or simply the terrible weight of a secret finally exposed to light. She felt Sebastião's hand on her shoulder, firm, comforting. "Let's go home," he said gently. She nodded, unable to speak. The revelation of the secret. When they were already heading toward the car, they heard hurried steps behind them. It was João, breathless, his face marked by a difficult decision. "Conceição, wait. I need to tell you something you deserve to know." Sebastião made a motion to step away to give them privacy, but Conceição held his hand, keeping him there. Whatever it was, she wanted him to hear it too. João hesitated, then spoke, the words rushing out as if he feared losing courage. "You're not my father's daughter. Your mother. She had an affair before you were born, with a man from the city, a veterinarian who came to serve the region from time to time." Conceição felt the world spin. "What?" "Dad found out when you were about 3 years old. That's why he always treated you differently. Worse, much worse." João seemed genuinely sorry. "I wanted to tell you before, but I was afraid. We all were." Conceição remained silent, processing the revelation. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The specific contempt her father had always shown her, different from how he treated her brothers. Her mother's complicit silence, who never defended her, loaded with guilt. The constant feeling of not belonging. "Do you know who he is? Who was that man?" she asked finally. João shook his head. "I only know his name was Augusto. Dr. Augusto. He stopped coming to the district after Mom told him about the pregnancy. We never heard from him again." Augusto. A name, finally. A piece of her story that had always been missing. Conceição didn't know what to feel. Anger, sadness, relief, maybe everything at once. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. João nodded, seeming lighter, as if he had gotten rid of a heavy burden. "You deserved to know. You deserve much more than we had to offer." Then looking at Sebastião, "Take care of her. She's stronger than she seems, but still." "Always," replied the farmer with a conviction that made Conceição's heart accelerate. On the way back to the farm, the silence in the car was dense but not uncomfortable. Both needed to process everything that had happened, all the revealed truths, all the fallen masks. Finally, Sebastião spoke. "I'm sorry for what happened, for the exposure, for the accusations." "Don't be," Conceição interrupted, surprising him. "For the first time I felt seen, defended, like I finally mattered." He looked at her briefly before returning attention to the dark road. "You always mattered, Conceição. Always." The words hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings, unmade promises, possibilities. When they arrived at the farm, the rest of the employees hadn't yet returned from the festa. The big house was quiet, illuminated only by the porch light they had left on. Sebastião parked the car and turned off the engine, but neither made a move to get out. It was as if they were suspended in a moment outside of time, where everything was possible. "What happens now?" asked Conceição, repeating the question she had asked weeks before in the library. But this time, there was a new urgency in her voice, a courage born from the night's events. Sebastião turned to face her in the car's twilight. "That depends on you," he replied, his voice low and intense. "It always has." Conceição felt her heart accelerate. She had spent 2 whole years rebuilding herself, learning to be a person, to have value, to make choices. And now, finally, she was before the most important choice of all. "I want to stay," she said simply. "Not as an employee, not as someone protected, but as—" She hesitated, looking for the right word. "As a partner." Sebastião held his breath. There was so much risk, so many years of self-imposed solitude, so many fears, so many doubts. But there was also that extraordinary woman before him who had faced humanity's worst and still managed to maintain the capacity to trust, to love. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving her one last chance to retreat. "I'm old, stubborn, full of scars." "And I'm young, stubborn and full of scars too," she completed, a small smile appearing at the corner of her lips. "Seems like a good combination to me." He couldn't help but smile in response. It would be difficult. People would talk. "Let them talk," replied Conceição, with a confidence she had never felt before. "We already faced the worst tonight. What else could they say?" Sebastião reached out his hand, hesitating, and touched her face with a delicacy that made her heart ache. "You make me want to believe again," he confessed, his voice almost a whisper. "In second chances, in new beginnings, in love," she completed boldly. "Yes," he replied, not averting his gaze, "in love." And so, under Kiara's starry sky, 2 wounded souls finally found the courage to take the step they had hesitated to take for so long. The first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, full of promises and possibilities. When they separated, there were tears in both their eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition, of meeting, of arrival. The threat from the shadows. On the other side of the road, hidden in darkness, Raimundo watched the scene with eyes clouded by hatred and alcohol. The public humiliation still burned in his chest like a live coal. "They'll pay," he muttered to himself. "Both of them." And in the backpack beside him, the cold metal of a stolen weapon reflected the moon's weak light. And the new dawn arrived at Santa Cruz Farm, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a spectacle that Conceição observed from the porch with a cup of hot coffee in her hands. She had slept little, but felt strangely alert, as if every cell in her body vibrated with new energy. The previous night had changed everything: the confrontation at the festa, João's revelation, the kiss with Sebastião. It was almost too much to process at once. And yet she felt a deep certainty, a sense of direction she had never experienced before. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't need to turn to know who it was. She knew that firm but careful walk, as she knew her own heart. "Good morning," said Sebastião, stopping beside her on the porch, respecting her space even after the intimacy shared the previous night. "Did you sleep well?" She smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I barely slept, too much on my mind." "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice trying to sound casual, but with a note of insecurity that touched her. Conceição turned to face him. In the dawn light, she could see every detail of his face, the lines that time and worries had drawn around his eyes and mouth, the graying hair at his temples, the stubble. It wasn't a young face, but it was a face she loved. "Not for a second," she replied, with a conviction that surprised them both. The relief in his gaze was palpable. For a moment they just stood there, side by side, watching the sun rise over the hills, comfortable in shared silence. Then Sebastião spoke, his voice more serious. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday, about your brother." Conceição nodded, her stomach tightening slightly. There was something in Sebastião's expression that worried her. What was it? "Raimundo wasn't at the festa when we went back to get the rest of the people," he explained. "Your father wasn't either. João said they left right after us, and no one has seen them since." A chill ran down Conceição's spine. She knew her brother's explosive temperament well, his tendency to nurse grudges, his inability to accept defeats or humiliations. "Do you think he might try something?" Sebastião hesitated, clearly not wanting to alarm her, but also unable to lie. "It's possible. I had some men reinforce surveillance on the farm, just as a precaution." Conceição nodded, grateful for the concern, but determined not to let fear of the past contaminate her present. "I won't live in fear of him or anyone else." Sebastião smiled, admiring her strength. "That's the Conceição I met at the stream that day. Brave, even when trembling." Days of happiness. The day passed in strange normalcy. The employees who had returned from the festa at dawn still commented on the events, but respectfully lowered their tone when Conceição or Sebastião approached. Doña Firmina, with her usual perspicacity, immediately noticed the change between them. The longer looks, the more natural closeness, the dissolved tension. But she made no direct comments, just smiled with approval when she saw them talking in the library after lunch. In the afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. It was João, alone, looking nervous and tired. Conceição received him on the porch, Sebastião discreetly at her side. "I came to warn," he said without beating around the bush. "Raimundo disappeared, took Dad's old shotgun and some money we kept for emergencies." Conceição felt her blood freeze. "Did he say anything? Where was he going?" João shook his head. "Nothing specific, but he was strange, more than usual, talking to himself, laughing for no reason. I think he finally lost his mind completely." Sebastião exchanged a worried look with Conceição. "Do you think he would come here?" "I don't know," João replied honestly. "I hope not, but I thought you should know." They thanked him for the warning, and Sebastião immediately reinforced security, placing trusted men at strategic points of the property. He didn't believe Raimundo would have the courage to invade the farm, but he also didn't underestimate the destructive power of a man driven by hatred and humiliation. In the storm approaches, night fell over Santa Cruz farm, bringing with it palpable tension. Conceição tried to keep busy in the kitchen, helping Doña Firmina with dinner preparation, but her thoughts kept returning to her missing brother and his possible intentions. The storm forming on the horizon didn't help. The dark sky, occasional lightning, the strong wind shaking the windows. It seemed like an omen, nature's warning. Sebastião entered the kitchen, his face tense despite his forced smile. "I think it's better if everyone stays inside tonight," he said, trying to sound casual. "The storm looks like it's going to be strong." Conceição nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. The men were positioned, vigilant. The farm was as protected as possible. Now they could only wait. Dinner was served earlier than usual, and everyone retired shortly after, leaving only Sebastião, Conceição, and Doña Firmina in the main room. The storm finally arrived with all its fury. Heavy rain pounded the windows, thunder shook the house structure, and occasionally the electric light flickered, threatening to leave them in darkness. "I'll check the oil lamps," said Doña Firmina, getting up. "This light won't last long." She had barely spoken these words when the farm plunged into darkness. For a few seconds they remained motionless, only the lightning's glare partially illuminating the environment. Then Doña Firmina lit a match and began lighting the oil lamps strategically positioned throughout the house. The yellow light created dancing shadows on the walls, giving the room an almost unreal air. "It must have been like this before electricity," commented Conceição, trying to relieve the tension. "Nights were longer," replied Sebastião with a nostalgic smile, "but also deeper. People talked more, told stories, paid attention to each other." A particularly loud crash made Conceição jump. It wasn't thunder. It sounded more like something heavy falling, or the front door opened violently, slamming against the wall. In the doorway, illuminated by lightning, stood the soaked and swaying figure of Raimundo, and in his hands the shotgun mentioned by João. "Finally found you," he said, his voice slurred, betraying intoxication. The happy family. The final confrontation. Sebastião immediately positioned himself in front of Conceição, protecting her with his own body. "Raimundo, lower that weapon. We can talk like civilized men." The intruder laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. "Civilized? Like yesterday was civilized? Humiliating me in front of the whole district?" His bloodshot and feverish eyes moved erratically from Sebastião to Conceição and back. "You!" He pointed at his sister. "Always the poor little thing, the victim, the one everyone needs to protect. And now you got what you wanted, didn't you? A rich old man to support you, to treat you like a princess." Conceição felt initial fear give way to growing anger. She was tired of being diminished, of being treated like an object without its own will. "That's not what I have here, Raimundo. I have respect, I have dignity, things you would never understand." The words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His face contorted in an expression of pure fury. "You ungrateful, after everything our family did for you." "Family?" Conceição's voice rose, loaded with emotion. "What family? The one that beat me, that treated me like a slave, that made me sleep on the floor. You don't even share blood with me." The shock on Raimundo's face was momentary, quickly replaced by contempt. "Ah, so the bastard told. I always knew you weren't one of us. None of us would be so weak, so pathetic." Sebastião stepped forward, his voice dangerously controlled. "That's enough, boy. Leave my house before I forget my principles." Raimundo raised the shotgun, pointing it directly at Sebastião's chest. "You don't give me orders, old man. I came to get what's mine." Conceição felt the world stop. She saw Raimundo's finger on the trigger, saw the murderous determination in his eyes. She saw the future she so desired about to be destroyed in a moment of madness and hatred. Without thinking, she moved. Fast, like never before, she threw herself forward, pushing Sebastião aside at the exact moment the shot echoed deafeningly inside the room. In this moment of extreme courage, Conceição shows us that true love makes us capable of any sacrifice. What acts of courage have you witnessed or experienced? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire others. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. Raimundo with the weapon still raised, Sebastião on the ground where he had fallen, Doña Firmina with her hands on her face, and Conceição standing, watching her brother with amazement. The shot had missed. In the confusion of the moment, in the drunkenness, in the blind fury, Raimundo had failed. The sound of the shot seemed to awaken something in Doña Firmina. With surprising agility for her age, the elderly lady grabbed a heavy bronze candlestick from the nearby table and, in a quick and precise movement, struck Raimundo on the head. The impact wasn't strong enough to seriously hurt him, but it caught him by surprise, making him stagger and drop the shotgun. Before he could recover, the back door burst open and 3 farm employees ran in, attracted by the sound of the shot. Within seconds, Raimundo was immobilized, disarmed, and firmly held. Conceição ran to Sebastião, helping him get up. "Are you all right? Did he hit you?" The concern in her voice was palpable. Sebastião shook his head, still processing what had happened. "I'm fine, thanks to you." He looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion that went beyond gratitude. "You could have been hurt." "I could have, but I wasn't," she interrupted, holding his face between her hands. "We're both fine." Raimundo, still struggling against the men holding him, shouted, "This isn't over. You'll pay, all of you." But his threats sounded empty now, stripped of the power that fear had given them. Sebastião looked at him with a mixture of pity and firmness. "It is over, boy. The police from Sobral are already on their way. João warned us that you had disappeared with the weapon, and we took precautions." The mention of police seemed to finally pierce the fog of anger and alcohol surrounding Raimundo. For the first time, he saw himself truly a pathetic man, driven by hatred and envy, about to ruin his own life because of unfounded grudges. The resolution, what followed, was almost anticlimactic. The police arrived, Raimundo was taken away, statements were given. The storm outside began to calm, as if it too was exhausted after such fury. When they were finally alone, Sebastião, Conceição, and Doña Firmina sat in the kitchen, drinking strong tea sweetened with more sugar than usual. The silence between them was comfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have gone through an intense experience together and emerged on the other side, transformed but whole. "What happens now?" Doña Firmina finally asked, looking from one to the other. Sebastião and Conceição exchanged a complicit look. "Now," he said, taking her hand in his, "now we truly begin." The new day. The next morning, Santa Cruz Farm woke under a clear and bright sky, as if the previous night's storm had washed not only the earth but also the souls that inhabited it. Conceição walked through the orchard, feeling the dew wet her bare feet when she saw Sebastião approaching. There was something different about him, a lightness, a renewed determination. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "Good morning," he replied, stopping beside her. "Did you sleep better tonight?" "Much better, as if a weight had been lifted." They stood in silence for a moment, just contemplating the dawning day, the opening possibilities. Then Sebastião spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about truly beginning." Conceição felt her heart accelerate. "And I think it's time to stop being afraid, to live in the past, to hide behind excuses." He turned to look at her directly. "I love you, Conceição. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it. Maybe I even fought against it, but it's true. And if you still want me, with all the baggage, with all the age difference, with all the challenges that will come..." She didn't let him finish. She placed a finger on his lips, gently silencing him. "I love you too. And yes, I want to face all of this with you by my side." The kiss they shared was different from the first. There was no hesitation now, no insecurity. Only certainty, only presence, only the perfect moment of two souls that had finally found their place. The months that followed, in the weeks that followed, life at Santa Cruz Farm found a new rhythm. Raimundo was convicted of attempted murder, but thanks to Conceição and Sebastião's testimony, who asked for clemency, he received a lighter sentence. João began visiting them regularly, slowly building a new relationship with his sister, based not on the blood they didn't share, but on the mutual choice to be family. As for Conceição's parents, they kept their distance, trapped in their own bitterness and limitations. And in the district, as was to be expected, tongues continued to wag. But this time, the gossip had a different tone. There was talk of redemption, of second chances, of how true love doesn't care about age or circumstances. And gradually, the image of Sebastião and Conceição as an unlikely couple gave way to the perception that they were, actually, perfectly suited to each other. Like Conceição and Sebastião, we all deserve second chances and new beginnings. If you believe in the transformative power of true love, consider subscribing to our channel to follow more stories that celebrate humanity's capacity for renewal. Traturhil. The wedding 6 months after that fateful night, in a simple ceremony held in the farm's garden, Conceição and Sebastião officiated their union. She wore a simple white cotton dress with small flowers embroidered on the hem, a work of love made by Doña Firmina. He, a dark suit that seemed almost uncomfortable on his body, accustomed to work clothes but which he wore with dignity. Among the guests were the farm employees and their families, some merchants from the district with whom Sebastião maintained good relations, and João, representing the only family bond Conceição chose to maintain. Neither had great expectations about the future. They knew there would be challenges, the age difference, both their emotional scars, the inevitable external judgments. But they also knew that, having survived what they had already faced, they could handle anything life might bring them. That night, when they were finally alone in their room, now a shared space, redesigned to accommodate the new reality, Conceição found a small package wrapped in simple paper on the bed. "What is this?" she asked, curious. Sebastião smiled, a smile that still contained traces of shyness, even after everything. "Open and see." Inside was a leather-bound notebook, blank pages waiting to be filled. "For you to write your story," he explained. "Our story, the way it really happened, not how others tell it." Conceição felt tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of happiness so intense it almost hurt. "Thank you," she said simply, because sometimes the simplest words carry the deepest meanings. Years later, 5 years had passed since that stormy night. Santa Cruz Farm had prospered under the joint management of Sebastião and Conceição. She had become not only his wife, but his true partner in all aspects of life. Conceição had learned to read and write fluently, mastered the farm's accounts, and had even begun teaching other women in the region. Her story of overcoming had become local legend, inspiring other women in similar situations to seek help. When Conceição turned 26, they received the blessing they most desired. She was expecting a child. The pregnancy was closely monitored by the city doctor. Ironically, a young doctor who turned out to be a distant cousin of her biological father, Dr. Augusto. When the time finally came, a healthy girl was born, with dark eyes like her mother's and a gentle smile like her father's. They named her Aurora. Udile, the meeting with the past, João became a regular visitor and eventually moved to work on the farm. Raimundo, after serving his sentence, attempted a reconciliation, but Conceição, although she forgave him, maintained a safe distance. Some wounds can heal, but leave permanent marks. Senor Manuel died 2 years later, bitter and alone. Doña Severina lived her last years cared for by a niece, carrying her secrets and remorse to the grave. One special afternoon, when Aurora was 3 years old, an unexpected visitor arrived at the farm. He was a middle-aged man, grey hair, distinguished bearing. He introduced himself as Dr. Augusto Mendes Filho, son of the veterinarian who had been Conceição's biological father. "I learned about the story through a colleague," he explained with tears in his eyes. "My father died 5 years ago, but he left letters about you, about your mother. He never knew you really existed." Legitime. It was an emotional meeting. Conceição finally knew part of her true origin, understood where some of her traits came from, her natural intelligence, her thirst for knowledge. Dr. Augusto Filho became a constant presence in the family's life, an adoptive grandfather to Aurora, filling gaps that Conceição didn't even know she had. Embody the legacy. 10 years after that morning, when Sebastião saw Conceição being humiliated in the yard, Santa Cruz Farm was known throughout the region not only for its prosperity, but for being a place where wounded people found healing and hope. Conceição, now a mature and respected woman, used to sit on the porch at dusk, watching Aurora play in the garden she herself had planted. Sometimes she took the notebook Sebastião had given her on their wedding day, now full of memories, recipes, poems, and reflections, and wrote a few lines about the day that had passed. On one of those evenings, Sebastião approached and sat beside her, as they had done for years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, seeing her contemplating the horizon. "About how strange life is," replied Conceição, resting her head on his shoulder. "About how the worst moments sometimes lead us to the best places. And would you regret anything?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Not even the bad moments. They brought me here, to you, to our daughter. How could I regret?" Aurora ran up to them, her hair loose in the wind, her eyes shining with joy. "Dad, Mom, look what I found." In her small hands, a blue-winged butterfly had landed, confident and serene. "She's not afraid," said the girl, marveled. Conceição smiled, gently touching her daughter's head. "When we're treated with tenderness, we don't need to be afraid." Like the butterfly that landed in Aurora's hands without fear, let this story transform something within you. In the comments, tell us, which moment of the story touched your heart most? Epilogue. That evening, as the sun set over the lands of the Sierra Sertão, 3 generations gathered on the porch of Santa Cruz Farm. Sebastião, the man who learned to love again. Conceição, the woman who discovered her own worth. And Aurora, the child who grew up knowing she was unconditionally loved. It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense, because real life doesn't have endings, only new beginnings. And for that family, each day was a new blank page, waiting to be filled with love, work, and hope. Because in the end, that's what Santa Cruz Farm had always represented. Not just a place, but a state of mind. The belief that Even in the darkest circumstances, there's always a possibility of light. There's always a path forward, upward, inward, to ourselves. There's always hope. And as the first star appeared in the certain sky, Conceição opened her notebook and wrote, "Today my daughter held a butterfly without fear. Today I understood that breaking chains isn't just about escape. It's about ensuring that the next generations don't even know they existed. True love doesn't just heal, it prevents. It doesn't just save, it builds. It doesn't just forgive, it transforms." And she closed the notebook with a smile, knowing that her story, a story of pain transformed into strength, wounds transformed into wisdom, fear transformed into love, would continue to echo through the generations to come. At Santa Cruz Farm, wounded people found healing and hope. Here in this space, we want to create something similar, a community where stories of overcoming inspire each other. If you felt at home with this narrative, subscribe to become part of this family that celebrates human strength in all its forms. And leave in the comments what lesson from this journey you'll take to life. Your reflection might touch and transform the heart of someone who needs hope today. Did you enjoy this moving story? If it touched you as much as it touched me, click like. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any. Tell me in the comments, do you believe that love can transform lives? Have you had an experience that completely changed your perspective? I want to hear your stories. And don't forget to share this video with that special person who needs to believe in second chances and the power of human connection. Until the next story, heartfelt hugs.